Welcome back to the Asians Represent podcast. My name is Daniel, and this is a special episode. This isn't a live streamed episode. If you're watching or listening, you're probably doing so on the day it was released. This is atypical for us, but we had an important topic that we wanted to discuss, and that's the D&D Summit. Now, or I guess D&D Creator Summit. Now, some of you might think, isn't it a little weird that Daniel is hosting a podcast about the thing that he attended and wrote about? I agree, that would be a little weird. So that's why we have Steve here returning to the podcast. And it's not like you left, but you just haven't been on for a bit. Steve is going to be hosting while our wonderful guest, Jay, and I talk about our experiences at the summit. We wanted to kind of create some space to discuss the differences between sort of the virtual and in-person attendees and our perspectives of it in a way that didn't involve outside noise. So that said, Steve, I'm going to hand it off to you. You are in charge.
Awesome. I know, I really appreciate it. And, on that idea of me hosting, and I don't get to do this very often, but I do have the opportunities, and we get to talk about that as a group, about kind of who do we want to host it, who do we want to drive it. And I find those conversations to be super, super valuable. So I'm just very appreciative of everyone that's here today to engage with that and say, hey, Steve, we trust you. Let's talk. So here we are. We're going to talk about the D&D Creator Summit. But before we do,
I was like, Steve,
intros.
We got to do introductions.
Before we do, don't worry, I got this. I have the power of notes. But before we do, let's do some intros. So, Nala, I know who you are. Daniel knows who you are, but our audience might not know. So could you please tell us who you are, what you do, and what your pronouns are?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nala, or Jay. I go by both names, and I use they, them pronouns. I am on Twitter at Nala Woo and at Nala Draws if you'd like to see my art. I am also on any other social media that I want you to find me on as at Nala Draws. That includes TikTok and what other places am I on? It's mainly TikTok and Twitter. I have Instagram, but I don't really use it. Anyways, I am a freelance illustrator and art director who works full-time in TTRPGs. I worked on Uncaged Goddesses, which won a couple of Ennies last year. I also do a lot of work in indie TTRPGs, so I worked on Apocalypse Keys and the Adventuring Artist Tarot deck released by Die Hard Dice, to name a couple projects. Coyote and Crow, super fun. And I'm doing a lot of things for the publishing Goblin, who released the Alleyman's Tarot deck, that company. Doing some really cool stuff with them that is coming out soon. Besides art, I am a voice actor, sensitivity consultant, and a TTRPG actual play performer. That's pretty much me. And thank you so much for having me on. It's been 3 years, I think.
Yeah, it's been 3 years. I mean, we've been talking, but it's been 3 years since you've been on the show.
Yeah. So thanks for having me back.
I think
glad I didn't scare you away.
Steve,
never.
I didn't tell you how this happened. We were literally talking the evening of the summit. I was like, we should do an Asians Represent. Yeah. And then boom, eye emoji on my post. And I was like, who is this? Nala, do you want to do this? Okay, done. That's how it happened.
It's me.
That's how it happened.
That's
Summoned.
so good. That's so good. Yeah. And I think it's been 3 years since we streamed together. We had that really awesome Jiangshi Blood in the Blanket Hall actual play and things like that. Anyways, Jay is super, super talented, if I can gush. Super talented, a riot, and also extremely professional. And the way that you balance those three things makes you a triple threat, and it's wonderful. So just hit up Jay on all those socials.
Ah, yes. Anyways. The triple threat in TTRPGs. Professional, a riot, and talented.
Look, it. You did, yeah. I'm definitely, I don't think I'm a riot. I think I'm professional and talented, but I'm definitely not a riot. I'm a double threat, so look at you.
Our outtakes on this episode say differently. Anyways, let's get right into our questions here. So I was not at the D&D Creator Summit, but I was following along on socials. I was really curious what was going to happen. And actually, I was kind of excited because this was, to my knowledge, something that really hasn't happened before. The last time it did happen, it didn't get much social media coverage. I didn't even know what happened until this Creator Summit. So I'm just really, really curious. So I'm going to start off by just saying, when you got contacted by Wizards of the Coast, or you got your emails, or however they mentioned it, what did you understand this particular summit to be? And like, what kind of goals do you think Wizards of the Coast was seeking out?
Jay, you can go.
Okay. I got my email on a Sunday at some point near the beginning of March. I don't remember the exact date. I know that a lot of people started announcing that they had been invited on either Tuesday or Wednesday of that week, but I had received my email on Sunday. When I first saw the email, I actually didn't know if it was legit or not. I thought it was either fake or a prank. And I was kind of like, whoa, this is so cool. I was just kind of like not sure. I checked the dates to see if I was available, and it conflicted slightly with a musical that I was doing hair and makeup design for. And I was just like, okay, like I would have to like leave the last show early to swing this. And so I emailed the person who emailed me back, and I was like, I was just like, I'm potentially interested. I would like more details. But in the meantime, I was just kind of like, what is this? Is this legit? And then once I started seeing more people posting about like, or announcing that they were going, I was like, oh, okay, not fake. Okay, cool. And my first initial read through of the email is I was like, this is interesting. An interesting move post OGL debacle. My other gut response was, why me? It specifically said in the email that it was like a summit for D&D creators, of which I don't consider myself a D&D creator, or at least a D&D specific creator. Because I don't make like YouTube content, I don't make like TikToks about D&D. Like the closest I've gotten has been working on Uncaged Goddesses, which is a third-party thing designed for D&D. I did character art for a WotC sponsored stream that was promoting Radiant Citadel on the Lady Maze channel, and I've played D&D on stream occasionally in my stead as an actual play performer. But like that's pretty much it. Like I like to think, at least like within my own self-analysis of my own brand or platform or whatever, that my brand is more so just that I play games in general, because I tend to play a lot of games, not just D&D. And so I remember feeling like kind of confused and like, oh, like that's interesting they invited me, especially when I started seeing more and more people posting that they're going to this. I was like, I feel nice to be included. Like that feels really good. But I was also just like, interesting.
That's fair.
Gotcha. No, it sounds like you had like some confusion as to kind of what even was going on. I mean, that like later as you collaborated with people, it kind of dispelled. But sorry, go on.
Oh, just something like, considering at the very beginning I thought this was a prank. I was definitely kind of confused throughout until I got more concrete details. Because I was just like, oh, like it's a completely paid for trip to Seattle. That's cool. I'd only been to Seattle once before. It was really cool. I snuck into a corporate convention, but that's a story for another time. And I wanted to go back, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. Cause I don't normally get to travel, unless I get some kind of scholarship or some kind of, help with, travel funds. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. But yeah. I was very confused until I got more details.
So after you like talked to a bunch of people, what kind of vibe were you getting about what the goal of the summit was going to be? Or did you just go in saying anything could happen and you just kind of went with the flow?
So my initial thought was, I was like, okay, it looks like they want feedback. And I was like, that's cool. I saw that the email had mentioned specifically they were going to give us a insight into the virtual tabletop, which I didn't know they were making a virtual tabletop. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And then they were like, rules revisions and updates, because I know that like 1D&D was a thing that was happening. I wasn't really following it super closely, again, because I don't play D&D as much as at least that I used to. And so I haven't really been following all of the new updates like at all. But they were like, oh, we'll tell you more about like rules changes. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, sure, fine. But specifically, there was a line in the email that I can't remember off the top of my mind, so don't quote me on this.
I've got the email pulled up,
but,
so if you kind of paraphrase, I can find it.
Okay, yeah, it's the one about like giving feedback or something. Like it's
Yeah.
a time for us to give feedback about like the direction or future or something.
So they say it twice. The first time they say something that came up consistently in these conversations, referring to like PAX Unplugged 2022, was a desire from you, the community we serve, to have more chances to see Wizard staff in person, more chances to provide feedback on how our team can improve the experience of making D&D content. That's a really specific thing to say, and more chances to see what's next for D&D. They also say in another paragraph in the email, this event will be a chance to see some of what our teams have been working on, including the D&D VTT and the D&D rules update, ask questions, give feedback, and connect with members of our studio and content teams.
Yes. So reading those two things, thank you. Reading those two things, I thought like, oh, they're actually looking to hear feedback from the community. And I thought that that was potentially a really good thing, because I know that the community has been really upset. I think WotC lost a lot of good faith from the space following the OGL debacle. And I definitely saw this as them, having gone back to the drawing board and been like, we done fucked up. How do we fix this? And, like people always talk about like, oh, if you mess up, you apologize and then you try to do better. And so I saw this as like WotC trying to do something good about it, trying to bring in people who can give them feedback. And then as I saw more and more people announcing that they were going, and I was sort of looking at all that at the tentative list of attendees, I was like, oh, this is really interesting, because there's a lot of marginalized folks who were invited, and a lot of marginalized folks who had been vocally critical of WotC in the past, myself included. And I was excited that this group of people would get a chance to be in the room with people in power positions at WotC who would be open to receiving feedback about how the company is doing. And so a part of me was really excited, because I built, at least in the beginning of my Twitter adventure, I built my platform off of advocating for diversity, equity, and inclusion in TTRPGs. I still do that now. But at the very beginning, like, that is definitely a large part of what I was basing my Twitter presence on. And so I was very tentatively excited about that. However, around that same time, the discourse started. And then that just made me feel really upset. And I wrote a really long thread about it. And that was sort of like one of the only things I kind of said about going, because a lot of people were getting harassed and attacked for saying that they were going to this thing. And I don't know if we'll get into this or not, but
yeah, maybe.
It was pretty bad, and it was very disheartening to see a space, a community. I tentatively say community in quotes. I don't think there's a D&D community. It's a space that we all exist in.
Yep.
But I saw the space begin to attack all of these marginalized creators who have all been saying from the very beginning, we want a seat at the table so that our voices can be heard. And we were supported by allies in this in this ask. Like, we want our voices heard. We want a seat at the table. Everyone was like, yay! And then we get invited to this event where we will get a seat at the table and our voices can be heard, and they're all like, no, not like that. And it was deeply frustrating for me to see that happen, because I was like, how the heck are you going to support us and boost us up when we've been yelling all these years about wanting a chance like this, and then we finally get offered a chance and now you're mad at us? Like, that made me so upset. Because my original interpretation of the email was that they were open to listening and open to hearing from us and hearing honest feedback about how they've been doing. And people were acting like this trip would just automatically buy us all off, and that we would, we would all change our minds about WotC magically, and they're going to get a bunch of good press after this, and blah, 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 blah. And I don't speak for any of the other attendees. I can only speak for myself, but I know that if anyone has followed me for a substantial amount of time, I would hope that these people would trust me and trust my integrity enough to know that just getting a free trip to Seattle is not going to change my mind. If the summit is good and they deserve praise, they will get praise from me. But if it's bad, I'm not gonna just come out with a bunch of praise just because they gave me a free vacation. Like that's not right and really frustrating. And also, a lot of
actually, if I can jump in
yes,
real quick,
of course.
because I think people would really be interested, just very, very explicitly and specifically, what kind of compensation did Wizards of the Coast offer you for coming to the summit? Because I've seen a little bit of misinformation there.
Yes, and it's in the email, which has been posted publicly. You can read the entire email. I know that I've posted it. I know that one of the other attendees, Bob, the World Builder, he did a video where he read the email line for line back when he was first invited. So this is what we were given. We had our flights to and from Seattle covered. We had our hotel covered. They gave us the option of, pretty much everyone flew in Sunday. The summit was on Monday. And then we had the option of either flying out Tuesday or staying the extra day Tuesday and flying out Wednesday. So we were given a chance to stay an extra day just to sightsee around Seattle or not. And if we chose to stay the extra day, they would cover that as well. So that's the flight, that's the hotel for either 3 days or 4 days. I'm bad at math. And then they also gave us a per diem to cover Ubers to and from the hotel, to cover food if we chose to get Uber Eats or whatever. They were upfront and said the hotel gives you free breakfast, and on the day of the summit, they are providing lunch and they are providing dinner at an unspecified location, which turned out to be Mock's Boarding House, where we got a free catered dinner, 2 free drink tickets, and they also gave us a nice little gift card to Mox. So I got to buy some games, which was really nice. And then the per diem differed based on if you stayed the extra day or not. I believe the final amount I was given was a little under $400. I think it was $380 or $385, somewhere around there. And
did you stay the extra day, or?
I did end up staying the extra day. So yes, I got more money because I stayed the extra day. And then they also increased the per diem before we all left to cover the cost of checking a bag. So they did give us a little extra money to cover checking a bag. And then the morning of the summit, they additionally gave us Uber gift cards just in case the per diem wasn't covering the Ubers, because Ubers from that airport were immensely expensive. So in addition, I was given Uber gift cards to cover the Ubers. And that is it. We did not have to sign an NDA. There was no content requirements, meaning they could tell us all this information. We could share it with our community space or not. I could go and then say nothing. No one would ever have to know that I went. They were not requiring us to say anything. But more importantly, they were not requiring us to say anything positive. We could say whatever we wanted. And that is an important distinction, because a lot of people were acting like we were all going to be forced to say good things about what was coming next for D&D.
That's
and
interesting.
That was not the case.
And yeah, I really like that, because Daniel, I'd love to know your kind of perspective, because you got in a remote invite to this.
I didn't.
And there was a lot going on.
I'll
so Daniel,
explain it. Yeah. So I mean,
tell me how
it's
you
not
got
like there's
to this
a
summit.
lot going on.
How did you get here?
I got in. How did I get here? I don't know. Where am I? So I got invited to go in person, but the email went to my junk, and I missed it. And I had actually taken a break from Twitter, as most people should. I had taken a break from Twitter after the whole OGL thing, So the email went to my junk on the 1st of March at 4:40 p.m. Eastern, and I missed it.
Actually, if I can ask, because I know you have done work for Wizards of the Coast, because you were one of the writers for Candlekeep Mysteries and various other things.
I've done
for
other
Wizards of the
things.
Coast.
I've done like I helped organize like the Avernus, like the big Avernus podcasting thing. I performed at D&D Live 2019. So I've done a lot.
Logically, it shouldn't have gone to your junk mail. But like, was there like a weird kind of subject?
No.
Or?
So what happened was, I have like contact with Wizards, and their emails don't typically go to my junk. But the invite came from a third party, which was GameSite. I guess they were like the influencer. The person, our contact was like the influencer campaign manager for me, who is not normally my contact. My contact is typically like a WotC person, Dixon. And so I didn't know the summit was happening, and I missed all of the discourse. I was basically just like ignorant of the entire thing. And then late March, I started seeing people talk about it. I was like, oh, cool. What's like the D&D Summit? That sounds neat. I was like, oh, it's like a D&D Direct. I'm like, this is neat. We'll like do like a video talking about the results. And then I was like, oh, like cool people that I know are going. That's awesome. Good for them. And then I was like, huh. And in my mind, not out of like FOMO or anything, I was like, I wonder if they sent me an email. I just had like a vibe, right? And I literally went into my email, and then I just searched Summit right there in my junk. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not going. So I emailed, and I was like, this email went to my junk. I'd love it. And I literally said, probably far too late to attend in person, but I'd love to go digitally. And that's basically how it turned out. And for me, honestly, I think going digitally was the best possible thing. Because if I had gone in person, I wouldn't have been able to do all of the writing that I did about the event.
Interesting.
Because just the way it was structured and all of this stuff going on, I literally sat at my computer in this seat from 12 p.m. Eastern to 12 a.m. And the event itself went from 12 to around like 8:45, but I was literally sitting there writing or listening back to my recordings for 12 hours straight. So like I wouldn't have been able to do a really thorough write-up if I had gone in person, because I was able to be like, okay, at this point in my recording, Jeremy Crawford said this thing about mixed characters. Go back to that point in the recording, re-listen, type out the quote. Every single quote that's in my write-up on my Substack, first of all, it's free, is word for word. My partner can attest to having to listen to Jeremy Crawford say the same sentence over and over again because I was so tired and my ADHD meds had worn off by the time I was trying to write out the quotes. So I was like, a couple words. Okay, go back. Next couple words. But yeah, so like I went virtually, even though I was of the group that was invited to go in person. My sense of the email is similar. I got the first idea. I was like, oh, this is weird. I don't really consider myself like an influencer, though. I guess by like marketing terms, I guess I'm a micro influencer because I have like a following and people who I guess listen to what I spew into the internet. But I don't really do like reviews. We don't really do as much actual play. In fact, like Steve, we're like very critical of WotC. We say something's good when it's good, and we say something's bad when it's bad, and we don't really pull punches. And our content, especially on this podcast, has always been about trying to be educational. Yes, I have worked for WotC, and I have been paid by WotC on actually a couple of occasions. And I've obviously created through WotC. But I was not actually expecting an invitation. I get the occasional like influencer package. Like throughout the year, like I'll receive stuff when books come out, but I don't get every single book when they come out. I think there are a couple that I've missed, and I actually don't go out and buy them myself. But when I got the email, I basically, like the first paragraph, like I had read, it's like, oh, see people in staff, like see the staff in person, talk about like how we can improve the experience of, and I think this is an important distinction in their defense. It says, to have more chances to see Wizards staff in person, more chances to provide feedback on how our team can improve the experience of making D&D content. And for me, I was like, oh, that's a little weird because I don't consider myself a D&D content creator. But I am very closely associated with D&D. I think more people know me because of D&D and then maybe Avatar. And then when I kept reading, they were like, oh, well, we're going to also showcase the VTT and the rules update. And so for me, I was immediately interested because I want to know what they do with the monk. I want to know what they're doing with like settings. And I was like, okay, I'm already interested, whether or not I'm going to attend in person or remotely. And then they said, ask questions, give feedback, and connect with members of the studio. I guess because I had figured out the email less than a week before the actual summit, I didn't have a lot of time to see the discourse or read anything. In my mind, I honestly thought it was they just want feedback about the things they were showing us. For me, it was very clearly a PR event. But with folks there, I also saw it as an opportunity to also like give my feedback. I mean, Steve, you and I have been very, very vocal, and anything that I would say to them in person, I've probably already said online and wouldn't be afraid to say again and reiterate. But I think it was kind of like a mix. Like it's this very obviously a PR event, but I also saw it as like a really good opportunity to talk to the right people about where the product is going. I didn't go thinking I could change the product, not at all.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know what decisions were being made about the product, and with Chris Perkins and who I've worked with on Candlekeep, and Jeremy Crawford, who like Jeremy and I sat on a panel together and like way back in the day, and like I was like, oh cool, I'll get to talk to these people again and ask them questions, and so I think we're kind of aligned there. I think it's very clear that this is a PR event, and I don't think anybody who went is saying otherwise. But I also think everybody understood that this is a really good opportunity to talk about things beyond the VTT and the rules, because issues of representation and accessibility are closely tied to both of those, whether or not people think it's a direct thing.
I think that's a really interesting take, because I think a lot of people looking at this could say that, yes, this was a thing they were doing that was going to be publicly available to a lot of consumers. It would help drum up traffic, I'll say, for Wizards of the Coast and Dungeons & Dragons as a brand. But at the same time, it can also be an ability for creators, influencers, whatever label you want to use, to give feedback directly to the staff that are responsible for the product. So it can be both, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think it was both. I think that it would have been really nice. Like, I know we're going to talk about things that we wish had happened. It would have been really nice to receive some sort of like, by package, I don't mean swag, but I mean packages in like a brief on what's going to be talked about, a clearer agenda, or even like, hey, these are the rules ahead of time. Take a look at them. And then if you have feedback, bring your feedback rather than sit, listen to a presentation, and then ask questions. But the fact that they didn't send those was, at least for me, a sign that we were going to be talked at, and we could respond in kind. Obviously, that didn't happen. We actually talked at them. But yeah, I think I'm kind of like sitting there right in the middle. But I think my situation is a little bit different because I didn't know I was going until like 5 days before. And I wasn't sort of like privy to the discourse at all. Like, I didn't know that there was all this hostility and volatility. And when I went and I was listening to everybody talking, I was like, yeah, that sucks. That sucks. And they are right to say everything that they're saying right here. And I'm just going to listen. But yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it was a mixed thing. Do I think it did WotC any good? Sure, people are excited about the rules. But I think a lot of people are also still extremely distrustful of WotC because of the OGL. I think that there were certainly moments that people got excited about. Like, I'm excited about the fighter in revised 5e. But, like, I think more people are like, so this isn't really a new D&D. This is just a revised D&D. I think people aren't as excited. I don't think that there are really people talking about the VTT as much. I don't think there's as much excitement there, especially given that our rollout is going to at least be a year and a half for the VTT. Did it help build trust? I don't know. I'm less trustful after that event because of the way it went out.
I will say,
Yeah.
just for all the viewers, we are recording this on April 6th.
Yes.
I don't know when it's going to be released, and there might be. I'm just saying because like
That's a good
because
point.
you were saying like, oh, no one's talking
It
about
is.
the VTT, and I'm like, people haven't necessarily made their videos for the people who went who are going to make content summarizing their experiences. Almost no one has released their stuff yet, so people might start talking more.
That's
once that
a
stuff
really good point, because the only
comes
thing
out.
I know about the VTT is what they showed us, and I think this is also a symptom of the quality of the event. The offhand comment I heard when they were trying to get us into the room, and all I heard was somebody made the VTT crash twice by rolling too many dice.
No, yes, that was my group.
Oh, okay. So like that's all I knew.
We broke it.
Yeah, I heard that somebody broke it twice. And I think this is also a symptom of like the virtual side of the event too, right?
Yeah,
'Cause
the virtual side got shafted.
we got shafted hard. And I think it was also a little like disappointing because the virtual attendees outnumbered the in-person attendees 3-1. It wasn't like there were like 15 people in like a Teams move. There were like, and this is what information I got from Dixon during our office hours. 30 to 40 people were invited and 32 attended in person.
Yes, that is correct.
150 were invited as virtual attendees and 80 to 90 attended. And everybody, I'm assuming in person and certainly remote, had a vastly different experience.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I think from here, I wanted to get into kind of like the summary of the day, but you know, Daniel, you've already written
I've written the summary.
and
Like it's going to be in the show notes. The summary doesn't hide anything. It's and you could look at the summary, look at my Twitter thread. You could see all the technical issues that we suffered from.
I can.
And
I want to know what happened before the opening remarks, though.
Yeah. So, I'm gonna skip breakfast, but we all got up for breakfast. We gathered in the lobby of the hotel. They split us into two groups. We had group 1, group 2. I don't know if there was any criteria for sorting us into groups or not. I was group 1, but we walked in our groups to the WotC headquarters. So we were separated for that, and then we all were milling about in the lobby, just kind of socializing with one another, like greeting each other. Both groups ended up reconvening in the lobby together. People were taking pictures, but it was a lot of just us like talking, drinking coffee, slowly waking up, because this was at like 8:30 in the morning Pacific time.
Right? Yeah, because Steve and I are in Eastern.
Yeah. And then WotC employees started like slowly filtering out of their cubicles and stuff, and were also milling about, socializing. People were starting to set up tech for the opening remarks stuff, so they told us, stay out of this area because the camera's going to be here, the people talking are going to be here, so leave this space open. Apparently I was visible on screen anyways, even though I thought I was staying
I didn't even see a
far enough
screen.
apart. That's what, yeah. And the only reason I knew that is because one of my friends who was attending digitally texted me and was like, I can see you. And I was like, oh no.
You were just doing one of these, like...
No, because, I didn't see it until much later, but I was so embarrassed because they had told us, like, stay free of this zone, and I thought I was far enough, like, that I wouldn't be visible, but apparently, I guess when the screen was visible, because as I've heard from you and others, that you couldn't see the opening remarks, but apparently it was visible for at some point of time, and at that point they saw me, and they were like, I see you. And I was like, oh,
Yeah,
no.
that's so funny.
Oh, no.
The opening remarks were for lack of a better word, a shit show.
Yeah, I've heard it was bad.
I'm one of the lucky people who was actually able to hear it. So I heard the entire opening remarks. There's nothing of note there. It was I think, honestly, the opening remarks set the tone for what I was expecting. I was like, oh yeah, this confirms what it is.
When you say nothing was there, do you mean that it was fluff?
It was
there
corporate.
No
it was corporate speak, right? It was like Cynthia Williams, the CEO of WotC, spoke for like 10 minutes, and it was just like, hey, thanks for coming, all that stuff. Talked about this D&D accessibility program, which was like, oh, this is awesome, but was referring to something that had already, like, that had come out.
No, so I can clarify that. It was an offhand comment. She only mentioned it as an offhand comment, and because I was one of the recipients of the D&D for All kit, I knew what she was talking about. But she was just saying someone here has worked on that, like, D&D accessibility thing, and was talking about Jennifer Kretschmer, who is one of the people who helped design that kit. That's all that was.
None of us knew, though, but Cynthia said it as a D&D accessibility program, and I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I put that down on my notes as, like, ask, and I actually asked this question more than 5 times throughout the entire day trying to get an answer. I didn't get an answer until the very end. Because I was
going to say, I remember that question being answered eventually.
I also didn't know that, like, all the attendees had, like, been in comms with each other on, like, Discord. The only reason why I got in touch with everyone is because in a tweet, I tagged Tanya to pass. And I was like, oh, Tanya just said this. And then Tanya DM'd me and was like, I didn't know you were attending. Here's a Discord server.
Oh.
And this was like 6 hours into it.
So I think that's also a really good thing to clarify, because from someone who's not attending, I assumed like everyone there was like buddy, bumping shoulders, like you knew exactly who was going to be there. But this leads me to
no idea who was going to be
different.
there. I had no idea who was going to be there.
They wouldn't tell us beforehand, so all the information I had was who was in this Discord server that was made.
Not by WotC. Not by WotC.
Yes, it was created by one of the attendees, and I got an invite from some person who I didn't know prior to the event, but they invited me because they saw that I had posted about going, so I got an invite to the Discord, and I jumped in there. And originally it was just the in-person attendees, and then they announced that there was going to be a digital portion, and then they decided to invite the digital attendees to the Discord as well. Then like there's so many more digital attendees, and obviously they didn't give us a list of who was invited, so it had to be if you talked about going, you had to know someone to get in the Discord.
One thing to note as well, on the note of like digital and in-person attendees, is the original email that everyone received for an in-person invite did not mention the alternative of a digital option. It didn't mention that you could attend digitally.
I knew that there was going to be a digital portion because I was talking about my potential conflict with the show that I was hair and makeup designer for, and Camille or Kat, can't remember who, but one of them had said, if you can't attend in person, you can attend digitally.
And I think that came from a conversation, though, not from the original comm.
Yes, no, it was not in the original email at all. No.
I'm looking at the email right now, and it's not in
Interesting.
there. It was really interesting. Like, I didn't know who was going. The only I was talking to a handful of people on Twitter, like, as we were all trying to figure it out, because I thought I got locked out and everything got delayed. I was talking to Ginny D about it, and we were just like, what's going on? Ginny kept getting locked out. And Ginny couldn't even get back in. And I was talking to WotC, and I was like, Ginny can't get back in. Can somebody reach out to Ginny? And Ginny couldn't even attend. Ginny didn't see any of it.
Yeah, I saw those tweets.
Wait, like at all?
At all. I think
oh my God.
They also had like a scheduling thing in the afternoon, but like they didn't get to like do any of it. And so like I was trying. I think they were there for the opening remarks, and that was it. But yeah.
It's sounding like there was a lot of information being like distributed like day of, like very like just in time information.
We got an email a couple of days before. I'm gonna pull up when I got that email, because I asked them to send emails to my other email.
Right.
So the event was on April 3rd, and on March 28th they sent out an email that was like a logistics email. It has the screenshot that I shared on my write-up about like, hey, you could talk about whatever you want. There was a little bit about like a loose agenda. It was just like opening remarks, morning sessions, includes office hours, lunch, afternoon sessions, wrap up, closing remarks. And then they also said, among your event links will be an invite to an office hour session. These digital exclusive sessions are small group informal conversations with D&D team members. where you're free to ask questions, connect, and just chat. That's actually what excited me. And I feel like I got a lot of value out of mine, but I know that a lot of people didn't.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
There were like pre-event questions that were sent out, and they basically said, finally, as we continue working on summit preparations, we wanted to get your input. The following are 2 optional questions. They bolded optional. All answers will be anonymized and will be used to help ensure that we are giving as much time as possible in areas that are of particular interest to you. And the 2 questions were, what do you expect from the Content Creator Summit? And do you have any specific questions or topics you'd like to learn more about at the Content Creator Summit? Those are the 2 questions. I don't know if in-person people were also told that they could ask these questions ahead of time.
Yeah, we did get a chance to ask questions ahead of time.
And so I did not, because I felt like I had a good understanding of what this was. And I also really only had a couple of questions. They were not really about the summit, and it was more like I kind of want to try to ask them in the moment, and I don't want them to prep for my answer. And so that's why I didn't ask questions. That was my personal choice.
That's
but yeah, we got
the same reason.
Okay,
for
yeah.
me, as like, because I didn't ask any questions beforehand either. Partially because I took too long trying to figure out what I did want to ask. But I also had thought going in that the summit would be a certain way that it didn't end up being. But I had thought that everyone, meaning me, the content relation team, the executives, like basically everyone who was involved in this, I had assumed that everyone was on the same page as to what this was going to be. I thought it was going to largely be a feedback session. We would get shown some new things. We'd give feedback, and then we'd get to discuss just in general. Like, that's what I thought it was going to be.
I think the best way to sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
And that's why I didn't ask or tell them like what I was expecting out of it, because based on the email I was sent previously, I thought we were all on the same page.
It just, honestly, the impression I got, and I just thought of this now, was that we were going as a focus group. That's kind of how it feels to me. It was a focus group.
Which is different than a feedback group, because a focus group, you show them things and you're like, give me feedback on this very specific thing I've shown.
Yeah,
you.
in hindsight, I think they could have, if they had said, this is like a focus group for creators and you're free to share what you learn, I think it would have provided people with a lot more clarity. But the fact that they had an opening paragraph that talked about the experience, giving us feedback about the experience of making D&D content, and then another one that was soliciting feedback, but framing it, I think, not super clearly around just the VTT and the rules. So I think there is room for ambiguity there. So like, I understand that like if people had different, I understand that there were different expectations going in, and I think it's fair that people had different expectations going in. And I think that, like Steve, our day jobs, we see emails like this all the time. And for me, I think it's a focus group, but it's also kind of vaguely communicated as like hey, this is an open forum, which is what I think a lot more people were excited about, like you, Jay, right?
Yeah, because I didn't get the vibes of it being PR. I didn't get the vibes of it being a focus group. And that I think part of that was just due to what all of the other in-person attendees were excited about, which was the feedback giving portion of it. I know that a lot of the discourse was people saying, oh, this is just a PR event and all of you are just going to start like parroting positive feedback about WotC or whatever. But like all of the people discoursing about this summit were saying it's just a PR event. And I and others were coming out saying, at the very least, the unwritten or unsaid hope, I think, of the attendees was that it wasn't going to be just a PR event. We were hoping that it would be more. And so, I saw it as a chance to let my voice be heard, and I would hope that they would listen. That's what I went into it hoping, and I think we'll get into this later. But midway through, myself and a bunch of the other attendees were all just sort of collectively realizing this is just a PR event, and it is more like a focus group, and not only did it feel like we were a focus group, but I think they picked the wrong people to be a focus group for this VTT, because a lot of us don't use VTTs. And it's like, I can't give you feedback on a product that is, first of all, so far away from being released that like any feedback we give on it now, it's like the thing that they showed us that morning. That's the other thing that the virtual attendees didn't get to see, is we got hands-on time to play around with this VTT. That is where my group broke it by rolling too many dice at one time, and then another group broke it because they discovered that your little 3D mini, you can stack another mini on top of that person's head, and then you can keep going all the way up into the sky. And so
it's kind of funny.
It is kind of funny.
That's what I do in real life, to be honest. I just
honestly, I think one thing that was revealed was the VTT that everyone saw at D&D Direct was like the previous version, was not even the current version that they're working on right now.
Yeah.
That's what they told us too, because like we were giving feedback in our hands-on session saying like, oh, the UI is kind of clunky, and the lead developer who was in our session was like, oh yeah, well, like we've updated that. And you know, inwardly, part of me, I first of all, I was very confused because they were trying to like lead us through a mini encounter to show off the thing, but like they didn't really teach us how it works. So a lot of us were like really confused the whole time while they were trying to get us to play D&D.
I don't remember who said it, but one person said that they felt like they had to jump through so many hoops just to do something super simple on the VTT.
Yeah.
And
This is like the classic software engineering design problem where you've been designing this thing for so long and you assume it's intuitive, and then as soon as a user uses it, it's like, no, it's not.
This is why a focus group is important. But
and if they wanted a focus group for the VTT, you should have picked people who use VTTs.
100%. So I remember the exact moment when I realized that everyone was misaligned. And it was actually when the scheduled Q&A started. So we had our like opening remarks, right? And then after the opening remarks, the digital attendees went into like our breakout rooms, which I learned were like very different. My breakout room was with Dixon, who is like community relations, creator relations. Dixon was awesome. And literally there were a lot of people who I really like respect who were in that. There was like 15 of us with Dixon. And Dixon was literally in his cubicle in the office on a webcam, and we were all there on camera. It was the only time that I got to speak into my microphone the entire summit. Everything else, we were off camera, and we could not speak into microphones. That's just to be clear. I don't think I put that in my write-up. But we straight up started, and to his credit, it's Mike from Sly Flourish, literally opened up with Dixon, like, why are we here? What are the goals with the summit? And we got a really clear and concise answer as to why. And I tweeted all about it, right? It's like, one active listen. This is just like, Dixon was really straight up with us too. They're like, hey, this is very much a trial. Like, they weren't going to get things right here. And so the group of us, the 15 out of like the 80 to 90, basically got the answer less than an hour into the summit. And so when we go into the second session, which was like the D&D Beyond one, and like the VTT, there's no mention of this, right? Because it's a tech demo and a PowerPoint presentation. When we go to the Q&A, somebody then, not immediately into the Q&A, asked, why are we even here? I think that was Connie.
It was.
And when Connie asked that question, my reaction was, oh, I know why we're here. You don't know why you're here? And not like to be condescending, but it was because I was told why I was here. Because we had that time with the WotC staff. And then it hit me.
Interesting.
The people who are here in person did not get the context that the 15 of us got.
Yeah.
I think.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
I wanted to
please.
like also tell the in-person side of that story.
Yeah, I want to know what happened after the opening remarks. What did you do before the VTT presentation?
Yeah, so that's where I was getting. So we did the opening remarks, and then we split into. So remember how I mentioned we had group 1, group 2?
Right.
They split group 1, group 2 into 2 more groups, I believe. So there's 4 groups total to split out and try the VTT hands-on. So we got put in like a meeting room where they had set up all of these really fancy like Alienware gaming laptops, and the VTT was all loaded up, and they very briefly showed us the controls, and I clicked past it too fast, and I had to fumble around to try and find the settings to find the controls again. And then they threw us right into the fire, quite literally, because we were in a tavern, and then they set it on fire, and they were like, "What do you do?" And I was like, "I can't figure out anything." And but like we got maybe. Also, do not quote me on any of these times. My sense of timing is so off this entire day. But it might have been around 30 to 45 minutes of hands-on time with this VTT. There was a bunch of WotC developers sitting in the back of our room, and I'm assuming it was the same for the other 3 groups. And they were taking notes the whole time, just listening to us. We would raise our hands if we encountered a tech issue, if we had questions. But they tried to lead us through this encounter. They spawned some monsters. We got to look at the animation. I felt like the equivalent of the child in kids soccer who, is picking dandelions off in the corner because I was walking my camera around and admiring the graphics and the art. I was looking at the lighting, chromatic aberration. They had chromatic aberration. Artists will understand. It looks beautiful. And I wasn't really paying attention to the combat encounter. We discovered that you can roll, so like you roll dice by like clicking on it and like flicking, and then there's a 3D dice that tumbles through the 3D environment, which is kind of cool. It interacts with gravity and bounces off everything. And then some people at the end of the table discovered that you can up the amount of dice you roll. So they're rolling like 100 D20s at the same time.
Why not? Of course.
And then that broke it, and we all got logged off the server.
Wait, everybody, even one, so on one computer, they kind of broke it, and then it broke it for everyone?
Yeah, because we were all on the same server, so that we all could see what everyone was doing. Yeah. So it logged all, 10 of us out of the thing or whatever. So it was kind of funny. But then after that, we had a short break. In theme with the whole thing, I took initiative and I asked if the snacks in the WotC kitchen were up for grabs, and they were like, "Please take our snacks," and took their snacks. I did. I have a Kit Kat from WotC here. Thank you. I took a lot of snacks. So we had a short snack break, and then we went to the D&D Beyond and Beyond presentation. So then that's the thing you were there for. And then after that, we got a tour of the, we got a very brief tour of the
office.
office.
Office, thank you. Yes, a tour of the office. And then we went back to the hotel for lunch. And then we had lunch, and then they started the presentation for the VTT after lunch. And sort of, as soon as they started that presentation, I was sitting there and I was like, we just did this morning. We were off in small groups looking at the VTT, and now we're being given another presentation about it. And so I knew that the digital attendees didn't get a chance to do that. And part of me was wondering, I was like, this is for them. Why are we here? Like, I wish we could have been doing something else while the digital attendees got shown this, because everything they were sort of talking about was all stuff that, like, at least my group, we had touched on, we had talked about, we'd given feedback. And by the end of that presentation, a lot of us were very, very upset because we felt like our time was being wasted. We had already done this morning, and we were like, this is a waste of our time. And at that point, I think we all simultaneously realized that this was a PR event, that this was a focus group, because they literally were asking, like, how can we approve this VTT? And it's like, I don't know, I'm not going to use it. Regardless of whatever, I'm not going to have my computer's not going to be able to run this. And they kept claiming that they wanted people to be able to run it on their phone.
Yeah, they said that they had ran it
how?
on their phone, on a phone.
And I was like, how?
Okay.
how? And they kept mentioning that there would be a 2D version that would be easier to run on like slower machines or whatever, but they gave us absolutely no details. Anytime we asked for specific things, they couldn't answer the questions because the VTT was so early in development. They hadn't thought about a lot of this stuff. And so again, we were all just kind of like, why are we here? So after that presentation...
So on the VTT, did they give you like more information about like what kind of build state it was in, what kind of work has gone to it? Because I've seen a lot of disparate pieces of information, like it started developing in 2021, stuff like that. Did they give any of that kind of information?
I don't think they gave us dates, and if they did, I was not paying attention because I was metaphorically picking daisies in the corner.
So,
but they did tell us that it was very early in development. When we gave comments about how clunky the UI was, they said that this is an older version, and that they had improved it since then. So I know that it's been in development for a while, and they told us that it's not slated to release for like a while in the future, but that's all we were told.
they gave us a timeline too during that presentation. I think I can maybe parse some context out of that. I could be wrong on this, which is why I didn't like write it in my like put it into words. They talked about how they potentially there were discussions about like what engine they're going to build it on, and so it's possible that they actually switched engines if they were starting way back when. But they were really the only technical question they answered, because a lot of people asked about tech specs. I asked about it early, and they read my question. Because the only way I can ask questions during the big presentations was to type into a Teams chat. And they said it's on Unreal 5 because Unreal 5 will enable the team to eventually bring it to consoles if that's on the roadmap. We know of 2023, 2024, and 2025. Essentially, 2025 is when they plan on some form of release. But until then, the VTT is already being used at WotC by friends and family. And we were told during our like office hours that in May we would get a chance to remotely start early alpha testing the VTT. And then they reiterated that to the big group. But it was actually after that VTT presentation, when Connie had asked that question, that I realized that that some of us knew what this was and some of us didn't. And it's not on anybody's fault either. It was the fact that it just wasn't clearly communicated.
Yeah,
Jay, go
so
ahead.
the other thing that I want to clear up or also just explain, because this wasn't privy to the virtual attendees, is that, and I also can't remember if we had taken a break from the VTT presentation or if we had, or if the presentation had fully ended and we were taking a break after. I honestly don't remember. But what I do know is that a group of the attendees immediately went outside following either the end of VTT presentation or a break during the VTT presentation. And we were all standing around outside and we were all venting to one another. I don't remember who exactly was in this circle, but I do know I was there. I know Jennifer Kretschmer was there. I know Connie was there. And a couple of other, it wasn't just us. There was definitely more people in this circle, but we were all vocally upset, and we were all talking about how like we're so disappointed at where this has gone, and we were saying like all the things that I said earlier, like this VTT presentation, we didn't have to do that because we did that in the morning. This would have been beneficial for the digital folks, obviously, because they didn't get to see it that morning, but for us it felt very repetitive. We were saying like this, it felt like we were a focus group, and you know, Connie and I were both saying like, we don't use VTTs, we're never going to use this product, why are they like wasting our time with this? Some of us are joking like, I could have taken a nap during that because like we've been up since 8 or sometimes even earlier. A WotC employee, I do not remember his last name, but his first name is Jorge or George. He says he uses the Spanish pronunciation around Spanish speakers and George around English speakers. His last name is a hyphenated last name. I do not remember what it was. But anyways,
Sure, yeah.
George walks over, hearing us, basically, because we're not being secretive. We're standing around in a circle right outside the doors complaining loudly. And he walks over and he basically tells us, like, I hear your frustrations. Please give me feedback. And he stood there while we all vented, mostly to each other, and he was just listening. He was writing every single thing down. We were talking about how our expectations were misaligned and that the WotC executives literally just wanted to show us their shiny new toys and, you know, get our feedback on it, that we felt like any feedback we were giving, they weren't even going to be able to use, at least for the VTT, because it's like, you know, whatever. And then a lot of our questions were being brushed aside. They weren't being answered. And we were all telling him, like, we feel like this has been a major waste of our time. And I know that, like, Connie and some others were saying, if I had known that this was a focus group, I would not have come. And and we were saying that, like, you know, if we expected this to be a high level feedback situation, like I said earlier, where we could talk more broadly about the future of D&D, where it's going as a product, as a brand, as well as discussions of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, all of these things that many attendees have spent hours prepping questions beforehand that we haven't gotten to use. And so George is taking all these notes, and he says, you know, I'm going to do what I can, because it sounds like we need to just have a Q&A. And we were all like, that would be great, because that's what we all came here for. Frankly, we all prepared for something that obviously was never going to happen. So George leaves, and Kat walks over. She was one of our main points of contact with regards to organizing all of our stuff.
Mine too.
And she is also listening to us complain, and then George comes back, and basically Kat and George tell us that they've rounded up some WotC executives and that they are going to give us a 30-minute Q&A session. We were supposed to start Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins' presentation about the rules,
the
rules updates. That was supposed to be the next thing on the docket. However, they pushed that to make room for this Q&A. And the only reason this Q&A happened was because myself and a group of people were outside loudly complaining. And we asked for this opportunity because that's what we all came here to do, and they gave us that opportunity. And that's how that happened. It was never a planned part of the summit.
And to note, like, Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford did not do the Q&A. It was hosted by Dan Rawson and Kyle Brink.
Yes.
Okay, good. That's a good note. This is very interesting to me as someone who wasn't there. Sorry to cut you off, Daniel.
Oh, no, that's okay. There is a thing worth noting for the virtual attendees in between these things, the sequence of events.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I'd love to hear that, because for someone who wasn't there, I assumed that, like, there was an agenda. I assumed it wasn't as fluid as what you've described, but it sounds like a lot of this was, you know, we talked about misalignment kind of starting off and that kind of stuff, but it really just seems like towards kind of midday, it just kind of starts falling apart at the seams, and all of a sudden, you know, the people who are running it are kind of trying their best to salvage any kind of value they can get out of it, considering that they had geared the AM hours really more towards VTT, and despite the email, it was less about feedback and more geared towards that. It's very interesting to me.
Like,
but Daniel,
we were being talked at. Yeah.
I don't know. I sit on the fence because I think that, and I think this also just comes from the fact that, like, Jay, you mentioned, you're like, you're not like a D&D influencer. You're like, you thought the email was a prank, right? You clearly don't get these emails. Right. And so, like, you don't know what to expect of these sorts of things. For me, like, I knew what I was getting to. I had my notes organized. I was like, session 1, session 2, session 3, and I had all these things out there. I didn't know the topics until, like, we arrived, because the agenda down to, like, it was basically all timed out for us. Right. It was like, hey, you know, I'm looking at it right now, 9:15 a.m. PST to 9:30 a.m. PST, summit opening. 9:30 to 11:30, morning sessions, includes office hours. 11:30 to 1 p.m., lunch. 1 p.m. to 5:25 p.m., afternoon sessions. 5:25 to 5:30, closing remarks. So I knew that, like, there was some structure. I personally did not think that I was going to, like, speak to execs. I thought that there would be an opportunity to speak to folks as high as, like, Jeremy and Chris. I mean, from the email itself, I look at it, and I've looked at it a lot in, like, the days since the event. And I was like, I think my assessment of it was fair. Like, my personal assessment of it was fair. I think I went in with my expectations, like, kind of tempered. But I also think that my office hour session with Dixon confirmed my expectations, which I think in this overall conversation did not happen for anybody else. And I think that's like that was kind of the breaking point for a lot of people, because when the question was asked by Connie, what is this event for? In my head, I was like, I already have notes on this. And again, like I said before, not to be condescending, but I was like, do you not know? Because I was more perplexed that WotC didn't communicate that to you folks, because it was like, I guess clear. And I say I guess because there is room, like I said before, for interpretation within the text of the email. But how did they not say everything that we were told by Dixon of like, hey, this is a trial event. We're hoping to do something more open at Gen Con. We want this to be an active listening thing. This is a small test. Like it was, I found it really odd that the people who were there in person were not communicated that, which I thought was really weird. For me, in between that like VTT presentation, after our focus group time, our office hours time, where you folks were testing the VTT, I thought that was super productive. I thought that was great. I got a lot out of it, right? We went to the VTT thing, and I got a lot out of that too, because, well, not the PowerPoint. The PowerPoint was like super vanilla.
Sure. Yeah.
But like the questions that were asked were really good, because this is when people were asking about localization, accessibility features, tech, and all that. The part that really, I mean, at that point I was a little like, this kind of sucks because of the technical issues. I'll note this because I didn't tweet it. The worst part about the end of the VTT presentation was that they're like, okay, cool, that's like, we'll end at that. And all of us are sitting in the room being like, do we leave? What's coming next? And we watch as they dismiss everybody who's in person and say, here's this table full of swag, take whatever you want. And we have to watch as people just get stuff.
What?
And I remember typing in the chat, be like, so do we just come back? Do we just leave? And I'm watching people just pick up stuff like books, and it's hard to see. It was also super grainy, but they literally.
Do you want to know what we got?
I know. I'll finish, and because I'm not.
Yeah.
This isn't a huge issue for me. I'll explain why.
Yeah.
The camera was not on the presenters. The camera, I would say like 50% of the camera was occupied by the table full of swag the entire time.
But yeah, I know.
By the table full of swag.
No.
They did say that they would be sending us stuff, and they did ask us for our mailing addresses and stuff like that. So I knew we were going to get it. But in my opinion, as like an event organizer, I think it's bad form to do something like that.
Yeah.
So they should have just honestly cut the feed.
I'm surprised they didn't cut it.
Yeah,
honestly.
and I think
that's weird.
And honestly, it's because they were like so inexperienced at running something like this. But yeah, I thought that was funny because I was like, are we just gonna sit here and watch them get free shit? Like, I know we're getting stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't honestly
so
care.
bad.
I have more stuff than I need. But I'm thinking, what about all of the other people who have never gotten free shit from WotC before? What about all the other people who maybe don't know what's going on? It felt weird. So it's not like I think people felt salty, but I think people felt like, this is a little odd. Just cut the feed. And then I just kind of left.
That's so weird. Yeah.
There actually came to a point when the solution to actually seeing the camera feed was to download the Microsoft Teams desktop app and run the meeting through that. Or some people I know for a fact were literally using the Teams app on their phone to watch and listening on their computer. But I thought that was a little odd. I think the VTT stuff was helpful for me, but I totally get where you're coming from, because if I had tested out the VTT and I have to watch essentially a PR presentation, a PowerPoint, I would be upset too.
We were comparing it to like a timeshare. Like we were like, we've been talked at regarding the VTT, something that isn't even applicable to a lot of us, for like a whole hour. Like that presentation was so long. I was sitting in the corner doodling with Connie. Like the two of us were.
I do like the doodles you've posted. I will say I think we should. I know, Steve, you're hosting. I think it'll be important for us to. We don't have to recap the whole event because I mean. It's all
you've done it.
It's all online. But the parts that we didn't see, like the part where you tried out the VTT, the part where you were kind of trying to figure out what's going on, I wasn't privy to that. But what happened at the the Q&A, what happened at the rule set talk, that's all I think, and not like tooting my horn because so many people were live tweeting it the whole time. It was very well documented. I think the one thing that really sucked, and I think we were talking about this before we started recording, was that I couldn't actually note who asked specific questions because the video quality was so bad.
Yeah.
I could not tell. And there were times when like folks were introducing themselves, and there were times when folks weren't introducing themselves. And I was like, what's happening?
That was a matter of people seeing or not seeing the message in the Discord for the in-person attendees. Somebody pinged at everyone and said, oh, by the way, we've had a request from the virtual attendees to identify yourself by name before you ask a question if you feel comfortable doing so. So a lot of people saw that message, but I'm assuming not everyone did. And then also it was so tense in that room that people were just forgetting. I
totally get, because there was a lot of tension to be Steve. There was a lot of tension in that room, and like I was like I am honestly the only people who advocated for the virtual attendees were also the marginalized people in that room. Let's like be quite honest. I think the things that were really interesting about it were that they were ill-equipped to even track our questions. It was really funny because in the chat wasn't refreshing, and people were so afraid of trying to leave the meeting and coming and to make it work and come back because people had been kicked and weren't able to return. I could not watch our own Teams chat live. Every 2 to 5 minutes, I had to literally put a period into the chat, hit enter to refresh the chat to see what was going on.
Oh my God.
Like I did not see a live chat feed for a good like 4 hours. So people kept pressing period. This, or I'd ask the same question again, knowing it would show me all of the other ones. But they were ill-equipped because people were talking to the chat, and people were like, we're being ignored in the chat. It would have been impossible for the moderators to save every single question.
Yeah.
I think one other thing was that really showed that they did not think a lot about the virtual segment of it was when they were doing this Q&A. They did a very D&D thing, and they were like, we're going to pass around initiative. And everybody got like a number, and they went down the initiative order. Guess who didn't get initiative order numbers?
Oh, no.
The virtual chat.
So they were like, okay, who has number 8? And we're just like, I don't have number 8. And when, like, Jay, you brought up the whole, like, hey, can we, like, vote to see if we can extend the Q&A period? How do I raise my hand? Because the folks who were presenting were like, okay, we'll put it to a vote. Who in the room would like to do this? And literally in the chat, we're all just like, raise hand on Microsoft Teams, I guess.
Yeah.
Like it was. It got to the point where the moderators, the first 2 moderators, really good, really really good, and then when the higher ups at WotC started moderating the chat, it just fell apart because we basically got ignored.
Latia did a really great job.
Latia did a great job. And then when it passed on to Kyle, like it was just like, okay, I guess I even tweeted, I guess I'm not asking questions anymore.
Yeah.
So if I can try to understand the order of events here. So a lot of the AM was VTT. You did another VTT thing with that break for lunch / vent outside of your in-person. Then it went to Q&A.
Lunch and vent were separate. We did lunch directly.
Oh, sorry. You went to lunch at the hotel, then you came back.
For the VTT presentation. And then there was the outside hall, which resulted in us getting a 30-minute Q&A. And then during the Q&A, because they did pass out initiative cards again for that. They only got through the first 4 questions. I was sitting there with question number 5. I had a whole list of questions I wanted to ask, but at the same time, I knew we were running out of time, and they handed out cards up to 9, I think. And not to mention all of the virtual attendees whose questions weren't getting answered. And then one of the people at the front of the room was like, and I think we are going to close this out. And I remember, because I had been typing in the Discord, I was like, I need to say something like I'm going to ask for more time. And I'm really nervous about doing it. I remember turning around to behind me, and the people sitting behind me were like, because I was like, do I interrupt? Like, how do I, do I stand up? And they were just encouraging me, nodding and just saying, like, You can do it.
Yeah.
You got this. And so I had the microphone, and I interrupted them and basically said, like, hey, can we, I don't speak for the whole room, but we haven't finished answering everyone's questions yet. Actually, I think literally Katie, when he said we are stopping this, Katie was like, but we did we get to everyone's questions? It was a very pointed question.
All the remote people are like,
and at the front of the room, like, they were like, oh, well, I guess not. And that's when I took that opportunity to stand up and was like, I would like more time because frankly, this is what we all came here to do. 30 minutes is not enough. We haven't gotten to everyone's questions. I had questions I wanted to ask you, but I am putting those aside so that I can ask for more time. And they looked so peeved. And
when you say they, are you comfortable saying who they are?
The two guys at the front of the room, I think Kyle Brink and
Dan.
Dan.
Okay.
They I remember one of them reacting like literally looked taken aback that I dared stand up and interrupt them.
Okay.
And I said, and I remember saying something like, if we were to put it to a vote, I think I would have the support of the room. And I said that not knowing if I had the support of the room. And I was so nervous. I could feel my heart pounding. It was honestly really terrifying to do that because, to be the person that stands up, it was really scary, honestly. And then he was just like, okay, so why don't I tell you what's coming up next? And it sounded very like, whatever. And then he was like, so, we're going to talk about the cool stuff, like the game.
Yeah,
or
I remember
whatever.
that
Like
moment.
It was very, very sassy and very dismissive of what I was trying to say. And then he was like, all right, let's put it to a vote. And the whole room started clapping or he was like, should we put it to a vote or whatever? And then he was like, okay, who would be in favor of, extending the Q&A? Almost every single person in the room raised their hand. I was sitting in like the second row, so I couldn't see behind me, but out of my peripheral vision, like so many people were in support of this.
I think the 8 people I could see on the screen raised their hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously they extended it. How much longer did it extend
30
to?
minutes.
Like an hour?
Like 30 minutes.
So an extra 30 minutes.
They said
Okay.
they would give us 15. I'm not sure how much time they actually ended up giving us, but they said 15.
They gave us, based on the questions that I had noted here, they gave us like 30 minutes. I think it's to their credit. I think they gave us 30 minutes because we went way over time. Because at the end, everybody, like all the WotC people, were just like complaining about being hungry. And like I'm here being like I haven't eaten all day.
Yeah.
Because I've just tried to type all of this stuff out. I think I had a single glass of orange juice in the 12-hour span. And that's like Steve, you know me. That's on me. That's not on WotC. That's just me.
Yeah, no, this is me mad at you.
Yeah, that's you mad at me. That's me hyperfixating. But like, I think we got like half an hour. And I think the thing that was the hardest part for me with that Q&A, aside from like hearing all of these things that we, people were like voicing their emotions and we were just trying to like take it all down in notes and stuff. I think the most frustrating part is like from an attendee perspective was that the WotC folks kept saying, if you got extra questions, we'll talk about it over dinner.
Oh.
And because there was a
Interesting.
dinner for the people who were in person. And the 80 to 90 of us who were there were like, what dinner? We knew what they were talking about, but we were like, yeah, but there's 80 to 90 of us who can't ask questions at this dinner and schmooze or whatever. At the same time, the moderators were like, we need to like prioritize virtual attendee questions. But it was like 6 questions to 1. Like, I think that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there were very few remote attendee questions asked. And then they kept saying, don't worry, we'll get your questions answered afterwards. We'll compile them. You know what that means.
Exactly.
And and they kept saying, we can answer these over dinner. We can answer these at dinner. We can talk more at dinner. I think at one point they kind of forgot that we were even there.
Sure.
Like I genuinely believe that. I think the other employees knew we were there, but I think Jeremy and like Chris forgot we were there at one point. And we were just kind of like trying to keep up. But it also got to the point where, and this is where I understand a lot of people's perspective, where they were actually talking about the game. And there are people there who are creators whose content is based on that. And there was genuine excitement about it. Like, oh, all new art, longer PHB, this sort of stuff, right? And that really changed the tone of the meeting because it was very much used, or I wouldn't say it was used, I don't want to apply intentionality, but it very much shifted the tone in favor of like the hosts.
No, because I do want to differentiate that like the Q&A was hosted by Kyle and Dan, and once the Q&A was over, we did the rules updates, which was hosted by Jeremy and Chris.
Correct.
And so that was two separate things.
You're right. My questions comment about Jeremy and Chris forgetting was during the rules part.
Yes.
Yes.
And then, but also during the rules part, they did tell us, the in-person attendees, that they would take only virtual questions because you guys didn't get to go to the dinner, which made sense. And so they did start taking more virtual questions at that time, although they were very dismissive of a lot of the virtual questions, which I thought was very frustrating. And yeah, that's...
So in order of events then, it sounds like it goes Q&A, extended Q&A, Jay, thank you. One D&D rule set kind of, and it goes through a
rules
bunch
presentation, and then art showcase, and then questions.
Yeah, I think Indestruct Boy did like an agenda of the one D&D stuff and like showed the slide decks and whatnot on Twitter. And then does that end the day? And then
that was the end for us. They had the dinner.
Yeah, they had the dinner.
So
without going into much detail, obviously, because dinners are kind of a gray area where you don't want to say too much. You don't want to like
sometimes
break, some trust and things like that. But what was your general vibe of that dinner that you had with them?
Really quickly. I was trying to remember what I was trying to. Oh, geez.
I'm sorry. I cut you off, and I'm like,
no, it's okay. I'm trying to remember what I had to say. Oh, it'll come to me. Anyways, so we went way over with the rules updates. Oh, yes. The rules update presentation, you are correct, was very overall positive. We thought that Jeremy and Chris answered questions, relatively more so than the other two. And I think, I don't speak for everyone, but based on the people I was talking to, there was some agreement that Jeremy and Chris's presentation was the best presentation of the day. They offered the most valuable information, and we were saying we wish that this was the first presentation we got, because a lot of us were so checked out by the time that presentation happened.
A lot of the
there had been so much
remote
tension.
people were like that too.
There was so much tension prior to that, and it was just like we wanted to be engaged, but a lot of people were just so out of it because of all the prior, emotions running high and all of that stuff. Yeah. But, I do want to say that, I think their presentation was the best of the day. I wish that had been the first thing. Anyways, after we concluded, we had, we were told that our dinner would be hosted at Mock's Boarding House, that we had a private room reservation from 7 till 10 when they closed, and that, it would just be open. You don't have to go. That's what the Uber cards they gave us that morning were for, was to get an Uber to and from Mock's. And I pulled a group together to all split an Uber together, and we had agreed, okay, we'll meet at 7. And it was currently like 6:15-ish when we said that, because we were like, or maybe 6:30, we were like, let's give us half an hour to like, just
decompress.
Decompress, calm down, drink some water, use the bathroom. I had a whole outfit change planned, so I was like, I'm gonna go change. But we had thought we'd have more time because it was supposed to end at the whole session of the day was supposed to end at 5:30, and we didn't get out until like 6:30.
Right.
Anyways, we show up to the dinner. We have this room in the back. They had a catered meal for us, and they also gave us 2 free drink tickets, which we could redeem for an alcoholic beverage. There instantly was a bit at the table I was at where certain individuals were trying to acquire everybody's unused drink tickets.
Sure.
It's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sort of thing happens.
Yeah, so some people had 4 to 6 drinks. I know that I gave my extra drink ticket away. I only had 1. But the general vibe, like, I did not talk to pretty much any WotC employees the entire time at dinner because I was so checked out. I wanted to decompress with my friends. So I sat down with who was at my table? Michelle, me, Connie, Austin, Gabe. I don't remember who else was kind of in our vicinity, but like I sat with my friends and we ate and we decompressed, and that's sort of what we did. People then split off to go peruse the store because they did give us a $50 gift card to the store. And it was very much a like, oh my God, I'm not going to come back here. They gave us $50 to spend. I was like,
Sure.
I have to buy something. So it was me like running around like looking for like, what can I spend $50 on? Because like I don't live in Seattle. I'm not going to come back to
Hashtag value.
Yep.
I had to spend the money.
Yeah.
So I ended up buying Kids on Brooms, and I bought
Sweet.
a board
I love
game
how you
called
bought an
Deep Sea
indie
Adventure.
game.
Yeah.
did buy
right.
an
I love
indie
how you
game.
used WotC money to buy an indie game. I thought
I did use WotC money to buy an indie game.
Oh, it
and
wasn't even
great.
intentional.
But then, you know, after dinner was about over, people were still mingling. A lot of the WotC employees came to this dinner. And we're talking with people. I think people did use that time to further the conversations, to ask more questions. However, that is not how I used the time because I was so checked out and so done.
That's fair.
I played some games with people, and that was pretty much it. I know that the CEO, Cynthia Williams, she showed up to the dinner, and I know some people like grabbed her to talk to her. But at least for me, I did not use the dinner to further any conversations with WotC employees because I was so done and just frustrated. And frankly, I was upset and I needed
That's
that
fair.
time with my friends, the people that I, like and wanted to talk with and just decompress with. So.
This is what I figured you would kind of describe, because when it comes to events like this, where it's a full day event and then you have dinner at the end, when it comes to like additional value to get out of these things, it skews definitely towards people who, can go and progress and navigate this kind of general professional business bro kind of atmosphere. And that's not for everyone, and it shouldn't be. And you shouldn't be expected to do that just to have your voice be heard.
Because that's
So-
that's a networking event we're talking about.
It's an
No,
orientation.
because-
Yeah, after you're exhausted. Sorry, go on, Jay.
Oh, I was just going to say, had I not been completely like demotivated throughout the entire day, I think I would have used the dinner to talk to WotC employees, because, like my whole thing going in is I was like, I'm going to make them listen to me. I have questions and I'm going to make them listen to me. I want to know how they're going to deal with race in D&D in the future. I want to know how they're going to make D&D accessible, how they are going to help DMs prep with regards to safety tools and exploring difficult topics and all of that stuff. Like, I had so many questions that I wanted to ask, and had I not been completely wiped, I think I would have used that event more as a networking or getting my questions answered kind of event. But unfortunately, I was so emotionally raw, I could not do it.
I think
I had tapped out.
I get that. I think it was interesting that, on the note of safety tools, like Steve, they did mention it briefly. They were like, the new DMG is going to have a safety tools section, but most people were checked out at that point. Like, people are going to miss things. They said there very vaguely. Jeremy said there will be a concept of a session 0 and safety tools that are included and rooted in the culture of playing D&D now, is kind of what he implied. But it was easy to miss. And for like the in-person attendees, I do not fault you for not remembering any of what happened during the rules stuff. It was like a really interesting presentation here because it was certainly the best. It was, by best, I mean the most polished of the presentations.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It was, honestly, I think a lot of the remote folks and me were like, this could have just been pre-recorded and sent to us.
Yeah.
That's
And that's how good of a, and like to Jeremy's credit, that's how good of a speaker he is. Like I could have gone and been like, oh, they pre-recorded this part. Cool. Like he's that good of a speaker, and like it's to be expected of Jeremy Crawford, right? I think the rules were exciting. Like there were parts of it that were like really cool. They were like called, like a lot of people were like, it's just becoming more like Pathfinder. I think the part that honestly like stuck out to me most, aside from like the whole monk thing, was actually that the internal DEI team said to use species over lineage. And I thought that really made me question their internal sort of review process if they thought that species was better than lineage.
I definitely have a lot of thoughts on that, and I think that could be a whole other
That's a whole other episode. I honestly think we should do a whole other episode on like when the Unearthed Arcana comes out and we can talk about the monk. We'll do a whole episode on that.
I'm into that. But what I'd like to do is actually kind of vibe off of this kind of, that last presentation was good. I think both of you have done a really great job of expressing your frustrations throughout the entire event, both in person and remote. And for someone like me, that's really, really valuable because I'm out here on the outside and I want WotC to do better. But in order to do better, I need to know where the pain points are. And obviously, I'm a consumer. I can't really do much. But as someone who's passionate about the hobby, this really helps to inform me about, how I go about navigating the space, how I go about talking about these things, and how I go about saying that this is like what I want to see when they have those feedback loops. So if I can try to like tap into some of the more positive, like this was good, I'd like to know if there was maybe one or two things you'd like to see improved for the next Creator Summit, which we know is going to happen. I think they announced it sometime in like Gen Con time.
They said it's going to happen at Gen Con, but at a venue outside of the main convention.
Okay, sure. But if there's like one, maybe two things you would like to see improved, what would you like to see? And Jay, I know you're like itching.
Jay, you go first.
So I want to hear it. Give it to me. What is it?
I don't know why they didn't do this in the first place, because this is what I thought they were going to do when I heard there was a digital and an in-person portion of this. I wish they had separated the digital attendees into their own thing and that it wasn't the in-person and the digital at the same thing. So that there was staff specifically assigned to do the digital portion and staff specifically assigned for the in-person portion. Because I think one of the biggest frustrations that I was getting during and then especially post, like directly post Summit, was that the digital attendees were largely ignored. And that was something that frustrated me because I saw people in the Discord, because like basically all of us were on this Discord typing, reacting, and at one point during the VTT presentation, when everybody was checked the fuck out, everybody was on their phones, and somebody in the Discord was like, I'm sure they can see us all on our phones. Like,
video quality was so bad. No.
No, not you. I meant the two people presenting.
Yeah.
The two people at the front of the room could see every single person in this room, not looking at them, checked out, looking down on their phones. And somebody else was like, those two dudes probably think we're all taking notes, lol.
That's what I was honestly just about to make that joke. I bet they thought you were taking notes or live tweeting the whole thing.
Yeah. No, exactly. But none of us were like really paying attention.
We're just texting.
But anyway, we were all talking to each other on this Discord. We were all like screaming internally about how poorly this was going. Anyway, I think one of the biggest things they could have done to improve this, and what I hope they do next time, is that if they offer both in-person and digital again, that they have separate staff to do both of those so that the digital attendees can get something specifically for them so that they don't feel ignored or talked over or, just shoved aside for tech issues and whatnot. Like y'all deserved better. And if there's anything I could do to improve that, like I wish I could have done more. I was seeing people like post their questions in the Discord chat so that in-person people could ask those questions for them. That happened multiple times during the days that we were asking virtual attendees questions out loud because they were not getting answered.
That's a good like want from like if you were to do it again. I think mine's actually a little bit different. I've got a couple. One, I think it kind of stems from like the root of a lot of the tension that this has caused, and it's the lack of clarity as to what the event is. If this is a PR event, if pardon? Sorry, you cut out for me.
Oh, I was just agreeing with you, and I was going to say I wish we were given like a more detailed itinerary.
I honestly think that if they were upfront and like, it's hard because like if you're going to invite, they also reveal that like internally the like creator term internally at WotC is fairly ambiguous. So if you're like considered a creator internally at WotC, you could be like a DM's Guild writer, you could be an influencer, you could be like a reviewer of products, you could be whatever. Like there is no like Asians represent like what we do and we're critical of like WotC and we talk about what's good and what's bad. Like we fall into the same sort of class as like folks who just do actual play and don't look at hard issues like we do, and not to their fault or anything. Like there literally isn't a division internally. And they also kind of talked about how there was only like one central inbox that's for Magic and D&D.
Yeah, I know. It was
and
weird.
So they had no way of triaging things because a lot of people were asking like, who is my point of contact? And they mentioned like, oh, around the time when they're doing their Magic the Gathering card previews because March of the Machine's coming out, like they are getting more requests about Magic, and it's harder for the D&D people to parse out what's a D&D request. And they were really transparent about like, yeah, we're going to fix this. But I think if I were to change one thing, I would change different things at various stages of the event.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the event, what I would do is if I'm going to send out invites and the event is going to be a PR event, I'm going to be very, very clear about it. The reason why I talked about like different sort of like people falling into different creator categories is because I am sure that there are people who receive invitations like this all the time and are aware of what is expected or aware of what the intentions are behind it. But very clearly there were people who received these sorts of like invites without having the experience of getting that sort of invitation before, right? And so expectations are misaligned, not to the fault of the invitee, but more to the fault of like the creator. And I think we should all take like accountability too. Like if we didn't know what it was, I know there are a lot of people who are going to be like, well, why didn't you just ask? Absolutely. We should have just asked. And that's what the virtual people did, right? But I think there's also the onus is on the person organizing to also be explicitly clear about what this is. So again, clarity. If this is a PR event, it's a PR event. Invite people. If they know it's a PR event, they can decline, like you said, Jay, right? If it's a focus group and you really want to do like this open town hall, be really explicit about it being that. Now, during the event, I personally think it's like on one end, you can separate the two and have two completely different events. I think the optics of it could be more challenging because you're going to have people who are like, oh, behind closed doors, there are these people. And it kind of can sow seeds of mistrust, especially when you know that some people are being flown out. What I think they should have done was honestly took inventory of who was there. There were very few writers, writers of adventurers and stuff like that who were there, at least that I know of. Like, I don't know everybody who's there. There are a lot of people who are like, have a lot of YouTube subscribers, have a lot of Twitter followers or whatever, or are good on TikTok or whatnot.
There was a decent portion of the in-person attendees who have written, edited, done like creator creation on the like game design side of things.
I think though for me, what was clear that it was PR event was that there were no like people who were like full-time cultural consultants there, right? There was none of that sort of stuff. And you could tell also by the kinds of questions being asked. Some people were like, I want to talk about the combat rules. And I'm not throwing shade at people, but I think there was one tweet going out and it was like, I wanted to talk about combat, but I didn't. And then there are other people who were like, well, I want to talk about racism in D&D. And they had all these different sort of agendas going in, and that's fine. I think what they should have done was took inventory of like who primarily does actual play, who primarily does reviews, who is a writer, an editor, an artist, right? I will say this. The art for this new edition of D&D or the revised D&D or whatever is really fucking baller. It's so good.
It looks really good.
It's so good.
It
Like I
looks
said this
really
multiple
good.
times. I want the red dragon and black dragon that we were shown framed, like in my home.
Wow.
It's so nice. It is the
The art
best
was
D&D
really
art
good.
that
That's
I have
huge
ever
praise.
seen. And I'm, we've talked about the art and how it's been really shitty. Like, this art is incredible.
Wow.
And I think there's good representation in the art too. And you could see it in some of the slides. They had this one slide with like an array of characters, and I was like, this is awesome. This is like the kind of diversity we saw in the D&D movie, which is actually one of my biggest points of praise for the D&D movie, and how normalized like all of the representation was in that movie. But that said, anyways, I would take stock of all the different sort of specialists that are in the room, right? If it were an event and they wanted a focus group. And I would honestly group people up by what they're doing. Like, I want an actual play person, a VTT person, a writer, and another person in a focus group. And let's talk about it from their perspectives. Or I would say all the writers can go and do this. Like, all the people who are cultural consultants can do this. All the artists spend more time looking at the art. I don't know what to, I just think art is pretty. I'm like, oh, art pretty, put on wall, right? But I know that, like, Jay, you're like chromatic aberration. What's that? Like, right? Like, I don't
It's
know what
real
that is.
juicy is what
But
it
I
is.
feel like you would get value out of being like, hey, we want to show you some of the art, right? Or the artistic process behind it. And you would get value out of that I wouldn't get.
I would have loved to see a piece from thumbnail to final.
How
and
cool. I think
the
that
art
would be cool to
director
see.
talk about process of how the artists work. That would have been so cool for me.
And then my smooth brain sort of version would be like, oh, that's cool. Look at that sketch. Oh, look at that painting. I think
Yeah.
I would still get value out of it, but not like you would, right? So if I were to like have this sort of blended in-person and sort of remote experience, I would have what people are receiving be geared towards what they are good at, right?
Yeah.
Even if it was a PR event, wouldn't it be more of a tactical move to say, let's take all the artists and show them the pretty things? Right, and take all the VTT people, the actual play people, to show them the VTT, and take all the writers and have them talk about racism or whatever, right? I think it would have been a smarter move to do that than to do this whole disjointed thing. Now, I know that there are probably some people who think, oh, this should have just been live streamed for the world.
Okay.
I agree and disagree. With the way this event was, I think WotC would be far less inclined to actually live stream the summit the way it actually played out. But if you had all these presentations, the way, the VTT was presented to us and the way that the rules were presented to us, well, that's just D&D Direct.
So
That's
I think
just the long form D&D Direct.
it's really interesting you mentioned that, because I think that flows into like the other themes here. So because I like summarizing.
Yeah, those were
what
my
I
two
heard
things.
here. What I heard here was, Jay, you're saying that accessibility is a big piece, and I'll get into that. Daniel, the clarity and also the strategy. If I had to pick 3 words just to describe the improvements here, it's accessibility, clarity, and strategy. Jay, I mean, the accessibility, we talked about the virtual attendees, but you've also talked about, standing up and speaking and how uncomfortable it was to do that, and how you needed a Discord. Like, you needed a third-party community to actually go and like have the strength and be galvanized to go and say these things. And I think everyone can appreciate the idea that standing in front of a crowd, especially when they have executives in the room, when people have C-level titles in front of their names, that's intimidating. And that's part and parcel of like how we navigate a lot of businesses. And, don't get it wrong, Wizards of the Coast at the end of the day is a business, it's a corporation.
Yep.
So I think that is like really important to highlight. So when I say accessibility, I'm encompassing all these kind of things about how people feel inclined, or more importantly, not inclined to engage with what they're trying to actually get you to engage with.
I think that's certainly linked to expectations too, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think
I'm even on the WotC side, maybe they weren't, and I'm not defending them. I'm kind of like, what is happening here, right? Maybe they simply thought that maybe they simply did not think that people wanted to talk about hard topics, so they were ill prepared to support people during that.
And yeah, I think that's clarity. Sorry, Jay, I think you have something to add to accessibility or clarity.
Oh yeah, just like in terms of accessibility too, is that like we were promised frequent breaks during the sessions so that people who had access needs would be able to take care of themselves, and they did not give us as many breaks as we had assumed there would be. And I know there was people who suffered poorly health-wise, like legit physically suffered because of that, and that made the event extremely inaccessible. I also know that there was virtual attendees, a virtual attendee who needed, who is deaf and needed the ASL interpreters, who did amazing, by the way. These
those
ASL
people were like
worked
MVPs.
overtime. They worked overtime to cover the entire event, even when it got extended by like more than an hour. But I heard from them later, and they were saying how they had to have the Teams open on like computer and iPad so that they could see the interpreter and see the presentation at the same time. And so that was just bad accessibility from Teams in the first place. And there's a lot of other like accessibility issues that I really wish they, had a better hold on, because like, to be extremely blunt, like WotC is a huge company. How do you not have your shit together for a digital summit? Like, come on. It's not that hard. Even like in terms of like moderating things, like I don't know, I might be tooting my own horn here, but I think I would have been a better moderator for these discussions, because like you have to give equal time to make sure everyone feels heard if you're going to do a hybrid session. This was the same thing like at art school when we had hybrid classes where 5 people got to show up in class in person and the other 15 people were virtual only. And the professors had to make sure that the virtual people were getting the same experience that the 5 in-person people were getting. And so it's like that thing. I'm like, I've had this experience, and there's no way that me like would be a better host than this huge company. But yet, here we are. Yeah. It's deeply frustrating.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead. No, go for it.
No,
okay, yes, I will go. I'll go ahead.
Canadians.
I think that I think that accessibility idea and like that idea of strategy that I mentioned, that can flow into that, because if you can be more clear about what your goals are and use that to inform your strategy, you can then be more strategic. You can be more clever, you're more efficient about what accessibilities you're going to lean into and why. So for example, if you're going to like know that these people will be virtual, you can invest more energy more efficiently into making sure that the remote attendees have the accessibility tools that they need, so that they're not just looking at butts and people picking up swag in a very awkward way. But there's also obviously more serious things as well. I chose to go the jokey route. Sorry.
Maybe this is a point of clarity on my end. And maybe this is just, I just don't understand this as well, and I'd love to learn more. When I was watching the presentation remotely, we basically had, imagine a rectangle, and 70% of it, or let's say 80% of it, is like the camera, the presentation itself, right? The PowerPoint, the screen that's being shared.
Okay.
We had 10%, right? That was like a little camera showing the room, which is why when we were like, who is that? Trying to look.
Who's talking? Who's
talking? Like, and it's, it's hard to recognize voices. Some, like, for me, like, I'm not good at recognizing voices or faces. Like, I'm just not. Like, if I've spent a lot of time with you and I like heard you, like, I'd be like, oh, I recognize Steve's voice anywhere. Like, but I couldn't recognize people. And then the other 10% is the ASL interpreter. So on my end, the ASL interpreter was like very prominent. Like, I can watch the thing and I can see them, but just for clarity, so the person who required the interpreter, the ASL interpreter was not big enough on the screen. Was that the issue?
From what I understand, because like,
or were they just not showing up and they had to have the meeting open twice?
It was something like that. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they were telling me / a table of people during the dinner. They were talking about how frustrating it was because they had to have the event open on 2 separate screens in order to see everything.
Yikes!
And they were saying how they were using a combination of the ASL interpreters plus the captions to fully like understand and process all the information that was being shared. But I'm pretty sure, if I had to hazard a guess, it was one of those situations where you have the presentation, like the view that you were
Very
talking
prominent.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that they can see the presentation, but then their second screen, they probably very likely pinned the interpreter, so the interpreter was the biggest thing, and that's probably what they had, but I don't want to put words in their mouth.
Yeah, I guess
that's what I'm assuming happened.
For the
though.
people listening or watching, this is the point where we are speculating. And I think
You know, it's definitely not our job to speculate on it, and it's actually up to, in my opinion, Wizards of the Coast to reach out to those people and get that feedback and make changes and discuss it, just like we are doing right now, where we're diving really deeply into these things, and we have our notes and all that kind of stuff because we want it to be better, because we know there's going to be a next time, and that next time is actually coming up very, very soon.
we'll see if they still go through with it.
We'll see.
I think that if you listen to this episode, and not to be like, you have to listen to this one, but if you listen to this episode and you read 3 or 4 of the Twitter threads from the virtual attendees, you could effectively have been at the summit. And like, if you read my thing, you saw every single question. I think that another, like, to the credit of the moderators, and not to the presenters, to the moderators, I'll say this. The moderators were in that, like, virtual chat constantly being like, we cannot start yet. The interpreter is not visible on screen. They were very, very clear about that. They were like, do not start yet. We need to pause. Like, Jeremy, I'm just using him as an example. Jeremy, stop talking right now. We don't have an interpreter visible. Like, the moderators were very good about that. And the interpreters themselves, I don't know how they did it, but they were doing this thing where they were transitioning. There was like a point where they have 2 interpreters at the same time, and then one would go and take a break, and they like didn't skip a beat. It was incredible. They were so cool.
Yeah, it was the handoff. I was on a
the
stream.
handoffs were so cool.
I was on a live stream charity event, one shot, where we had a deaf player, and we also had 2 interpreters who would switch off, and they had this like very well choreographed switch off thing where they would like ping the producer so that the overlay camera could switch, and they would switch off like so seamlessly. And it was really cool to experience that and see.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they were so professional.
I love hearing stories like that, because accessibility, these problems and these issues and these challenges, they have been solved. It's just a matter of listening to the people who live these experiences and have gone through the struggles and found solutions, and then implementing the solutions. So I think the next summit, if it does happen, could be really, really interesting. My last question, because I know we're going way, way over. Daniel, have fun editing this one. The last question I have here is, if this happens again, if you were to speculate what the next, I think it's going to be Gen Con. They mentioned Gen Con, right?
Yeah, they said Gen Con.
What do you think that's going to look like for the next summit? And
It's not going to be a summit.
So speculate. What is this next thing, this nebulous idea? What is it going to be like, do you think?
So we'll first I think we should seek some context. Have either of you been to Gen Con?
No.
I went
I'm
for the
terrified
first
of it.
time last year.
Fair.
It is where I broke my ankle, and I found out firsthand that the convention center is not accessible for those who use wheelchairs. I know that they're working on it as far as the Annie Awards go. There was no ramp to get on the stage to the Annie Awards, so I had to crawl onto the stage. And this year, they're not requiring vaccines or masks, so regardless of if I'm invited or not, I will not be attending.
Yeah. Okay. So you
but I
have a
gone
sense of like
once.
So you have the sense of like how many people show up to Gen Con, right?
Yes, it's a lot.
Like it's like Steve. I'm like 150,000 people. Like it's huge.
What the
It's-
fuck? Okay, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so when
I
you-
don't think it
so-
was that big. I think it's more like 80,000, but still,
It's like
a lot of people.
100K people. Let's say 100K
figures.
people. Like knowing that there isn't a vaccine or masks like requirement at the con, and knowing the scale of the con, it is like a no.
Scary.
It's scary.
Terrifying.
Scary. It's like the San Diego Comic-Con of tabletop games. But anyways, if they were to do a summit at Gen Con, it truly would not be a summit, because based on the sheer number of people who go to Gen Con, they would not be able to actually have a conversation. Like
I think that depends if it would be open to the public or if it would be select invite again.
I don't
think that
I
depends.
think so that's where I'm kind of going. I think there are 2 ways that they would do it. on one end, I think they would go and say, have it be an open thing with like, I guess you have to register and get seats because they would have to not break fire code, right? But there'd be a select number of people who would be able to go, and it would be very much a presentation like we got. It's like, hey, this is the VTT. Hey, this is Jeremy Crawford doing a rules update. But it's not that like open discourse that could happen at an actual sort of summit, right? So in my mind, I think on one end, it would just be a presentation with fan interaction at the end where people could line up and do a Q&A.
Yeah.
Another way I think they could do it is if it was closed or if it was still open, they would do a panel and have select creators on, and it would be more of a conversation. And I know people have done that before because that's how I met Jeremy Crawford at Fan Expo. I was on a random panel and he sat right next to me. And I was like, I don't belong here. But we did a panel together and we talked about games. And he was present and talking about 5e. This was like 2018, 2019. They could do it that way, and they could have a design panel. And again, it would be less formal than like, hey, this is a pitch. Like, I'm not talking to investors. We're doing a panel, more of a Q&A with a moderator, right? They'll get a celebrity moderator or something like that, right? They could do it that way. Alternatively, they could have folks go behind closed doors, because there was talk of this being off like the main convention. Do it behind closed doors, have people there, host an open conversation, and live stream it. They could do that way. But I don't think that would happen because there would be no point of doing it at Gen Con. Right. And if they're going to do something at Gen Con, it would have to be open to attendees of the convention. From a PR perspective, I think if you did a closed door thing at the world's biggest tabletop gaming convention, I think more people would be upset that they couldn't attend that. Having, people pay like thousands of dollars just to go to Gen Con, let alone all the money they spend at Gen Con, right? So I think it would have to involve large groups of fan interaction. WotC it would look so bad if they were like certain ticket holders only and you had to pay extra. It would look so bad if they did it that way.
Yeah.
So it would have to be like anybody who has a Gen Con badge can go, or you have to register and it's a first come first serve, or there's some sort of lottery. Gen Con is equipped to do that because they do a Gen Con hotel lottery. So they could do something very similar for this D&D thing. I think it would have to involve either a very corporate presentation like a D&D Direct Live that they would also broadcast to the rest of the world, because Gen Con does do a lot of streaming. So they would do a thing in front of an audience, they would talk, there would be fan Q&A. Or they would do a panel with fan Q&A.
I think it's really interesting because like what I gather
I think that's
from
the most realistic thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I think from like the other conversations we've had leading up to this, it's very clear to me that the methodology of how you go about doing it changes the value that the consumers, the attendees get. And I think that's like critical for Wizards of the Coast to like internalize and act upon.
And that goes back to like my first point of improvement. It's communicating intent. If they communicate their intent of like, hey, Jay, we'd like you to come speak on this panel and we're going to talk about the rules. You'd be like, maybe no, right?
Yeah.
But if they were like, we want to have you on a panel and it will be an honest conversation, but it's really about the rules and they don't tell you, then you might be like, okay, and then show up and be like, this isn't what I signed up for, right? As long as they're really clear with those involved and those attending. If they're going to be like, hey, so-and-so is going to talk about the rules, maybe they'll play the new rules live. Honestly, I think that would be as a fan of D&D, I think that would be something to do. We'll host an event where we'll talk about the things, and then we're going to have Jeremy Crawford run the new rule set.
That's cool. Jay, to close us off here, I'd love to know your thoughts about if you had to speculate what the next Wizards of the Coast thing would be realistically. What do you see? What do you see in your third eye, your crystal ball?
Outside of and Steve, your question is outside of this Gen Con thing, right?
Well, I mean, like they said it's going to be in Gen Con, so you can take that as you will, but
okay.
I'm not 100% certain it's going to be at Gen Con because like you said, how they go about doing it will change the value. And it's very clear from this conversation, they weren't 100% internally aligned, if I can use a business term, on the value of
This whole time
summit.
we've been just doing that.
Yeah.
I want to hear what Jay thinks. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually, I think I might disagree with you, Daniel,
That's fair, yeah.
only because I don't see them opening this thing up to the public, despite the amount of public outcry that would occur. And this was a discussion point, and I think you mentioned it too, like, oh, why wasn't this summit like available to the public? And I think like what the general consensus is that every single, and I'm only speaking for the in-person attendees, but like every single in-person attendee was selected for a reason. And I know at the very beginning, I was like, I don't even know why I was invited, blah, 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 blah. And after I talked to the rest of the attendees, my presence was further affirmed for me, where they were like, no, you deserve to be here because, you may not be like a D&D content creator, but you are a relatively known person in TTRPGs, and I have been vocally critical in the past, and had they actually been seeking out feedback, it makes sense to invite somebody like me. It makes sense. And there was a discussion in the Discord about whether or not this should have been public or not. And people were saying like, no, frankly, it shouldn't have been public because they invited very specific people for a very specific reason. And if you had invited the world, there would not have been as much focused time to have specific discussion on the things they wanted discussion about. Now, that was all prior to the event. Now that we've been to the event, I'm kind of like, well, based on the stuff that they had planned and the stuff that, had been on the itinerary from the beginning, yeah, maybe this could have been streamed. At the very least, we kept joking like, oh, this presentation could have been an email, like, this could have been pre-recorded, like all of that stuff. So that being said, for the future, I can see it being a thing where, again, it is invite only. They invite people. Maybe they focus less on forward-facing content creators and more so on back-end folks, like editors, freelance writers, etc., like those kinds of folks. And they invite them to Gen Con. They say, we'll pay for your flight, your hotel, we'll pay for your con badge. And on the very first, maybe you come a day early. You come on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, the day before the con, we have a summit, just like, whatever. So we get you all in a secondary location, and we have a similar event talking about similar things, or not like similar specific to what we talked about, because hopefully they're going to talk about different things in the summer when Gen Con happens. But like, that's my guess, is that they will focus on a different group of people, fly them out, say, here, go to the convention, but also come here for this specific event. We're going to do, I'm hoping to God that they've learned what people actually want, which is feedback sessions. And hopefully, at least I saw from freelance writers, they want to talk about future freelance opportunities, with D&D not hiring as many freelance writers anymore, at least that they used to. There's a reason Radiant Citadel is one of the best books to come out of D&D in a long time, is because of the strength of the freelance writers who are hired for that book. I know a lot of the questions that that stood out to me the most were questions about how is and I don't actually remember if this got asked, but I definitely was intending on asking this. It might have been asked in the D&D Beyond session. I don't remember. But like, how is WotC going to continue cultivating new talent? How are they going to discover more marginalized
There was a question
writers?
about that.
Okay,
there was a question about that.
Cool.
So the question was essentially, is there going to be a like a mentorship program?
The mentorship part, right.
There was a question. It's in my write-up. The answer is they didn't really have. It was a non-answer.
Sure.
Yeah. But anyways, I think like if I had to guess, that would be what the next one is focused on, and that it would be similar to what we went through. Hopefully they've learned, but I think it's going to be similar in concept with a different group of people that they invite. I think would be my guess.
Yeah.
I don't think you quite disagree with me. I think it's really, we don't quite know what WotC's intentions are with another summit. I think that's like a really big thing. Are they going to call it a creator summit, or is it just the D&D summit?
Yeah.
I think it would be bold to say that WotC would basically fly people out for what is essentially a job fair.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I think in a perfect world it might be cool, but it really depends on what they want to do with the product moving forward. Like how much of it is going to be digital.
Because I think it also depends on like, what they really want to focus on. Because I know that a majority of the creators who were flown out for this come from the US or Canada. There was very few, if any, I know Johnny was there, but very few international folks.
Yeah.
Represented
They were all
in the
remote, and the
in-person
time zone
attendees.
really fucked with people because they were like, well, I have to go to bed now, and they missed out on like
Yeah.
hours of content because of the time differences.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I know that they want to do events like this in other markets where there are offices.
yeah, they did mention holding international events and stuff.
I suspect, I think they'll continue to try to do like what you're saying with these like sort of creator focused events, maybe around cultivating talent, or maybe just about like open discussions. But what I foresee is actually a combination of two. I think both of our suggestions will probably manifest. I think they'll continue to do these closed door events, but I think at conventions, they will be fan events.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because WotC hasn't done a Gen Con in a really long time.
Yeah.
So I think they would use it as a fan opportunity. But again, to your point, then it wouldn't be a creator summit. It would just be a D&D Direct live.
And that's not to say they won't do both. Like I can see them doing
that's
a
the
creator
point I'm
summit
making.
and then
They'll
them
do both. I think they'll do
summarizing.
both.
Yeah. I think all the frustrations, everything that you have mentioned, and I want to really thank you because we went into a lot of details about the things, like the very nuanced things that happened at that event that the general public just wasn't privy to. And hearing your stories and your experiences through it, especially considering one was in person, one was virtual, and all of like the individual pieces there, that really helps to paint a picture of kind of what you both went through. Helps to inform kind of what Wizards of the Coast was trying to do successfully or not, and during this conversation leaning towards not really. But also we know that this was kind of an experiment. They basically said as much. So this last little piece here, I think, really kind of puts a nice bow on it because they got a lot of work ahead of them, in my opinion, and I think both of you would agree. But there's a core, there's like a seed of value here that could really blossom if they were to take this kind of feedback, consider it, talk about it, and guide that growth through the ideas of accessibility, of trying to make goals clear, and really strategizing about what those goals are and how we're going to achieve them, given all these other pieces that are in play. It's not easy. I don't envy them. But if they truly do want to use this and get some value out of it, I think they have to put the work into it. And this is
What you're saying, Steve, is they should take an agile and iterative approach to this.
So yeah, we're gonna end the stream here.
Honestly, I want to thank you, Jay, for joining Steve and I, because I know that you know exactly what I went through, but I didn't know about your experience. So this was actually really eye-opening to me. And to like the audience, Jay and I did not have a conversation about our different experiences prior to this. This was the first time I have heard anything about what happened in between. I didn't ask about what happened in the VTT sessions. I just knew that you folks broke it somehow. And it's really
did
funny
break
to
it.
know it was for like rolling too many dice and standing people on top of each other.
It's pretty goofy.
I've got a lot of thoughts. Like I'm speculating in my head. Like I got a lot of value from you sharing, and I honestly think it was like a great conversation. Like understanding that like everybody had very different expectations going into it, and I think a lot of people seem to kind of want to place blame on people or direct hate to people out of either jealousy, like the FOMO, but also like their own misconceptions of what the Creator Summit was, because I think Wizards of the Coast was also unclear about what it was to the general public. So I think the one thing we learned from this episode was we should all take a step back, and try to understand different perspectives before we make a judgment call, which sounds silly to say on a podcast, but we keep, repeating ourselves over and over again. It's really important to step back, listen, and then react when you get more of a picture.
Absolutely.
Because I think a lot of people's thoughts about what happened are just either flat out wrong, or they already have a bias against certain attendees for whatever reason. So, and I said this at the very beginning, it unfortunately was a very lose-lose situation for attendees because, if I went and the summit was great, and they actually listened, and I felt positively about the change that they said they were going to do, and I came back on Twitter and said, yeah, it actually went really well. They listened, and I'm feeling pretty good. I'd be called a liar. They would say that they would not trust me because they would think I got bought off, and they would think that, I was paid to say these things. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if it went terribly and it was, just a PR event and it was bad, and I come on Twitter complaining, complaining is a very dismissive word, but talking about how poorly it went, then, all those same people would be like, told you so, sucks to suck.
Yeah.
Do you think that's kind of what's
them.
happening right now, though? I think that's kind of what's happening, right? We went, and it was certainly not what was expected, and it wasn't like the good event everybody was expecting.
Hoping it would be, yeah.
Yeah, and I think now people are kind of reacting with that volatility, which is also fueled by other people who weren't in attendance but maybe have a stake in the conversation.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to limit my internet usage over the next week or so. I've already seen a lot of discourse breaking out regarding the summit, and I have said a couple things. I've said a couple threads, but I'm going to try to limit me talking about it because I know what happened. If people want to know what happened, lots of the people who went are going to be making content. Don't come to me to look for content. I'm doing this podcast, and pretty much that might be it. But there are other people who are going to be talking about their experiences in detail. You're free to consume, whatever they decide to say. But, for me, it happened. I'm feeling very meh about it, trying to decide how to talk to my family and friends who are removed from TTRPG Twitter about how it went, because in order to explain why it was poor, I have to give context all the way back to the OGL debacle in January, and that's a very long story. And so it happened. I'm glad I did what I did. I'm sad that I had to do what I did, but I'm happy that I did it. I would do it again in a heartbeat. And it sucks that people online are still just so mad.
Yeah. I mean, even if this didn't happen, even if you didn't, go to this event or whatnot, I think it's great to hear that you're going to be taking time away from social media and the internet, because everybody should. Everybody should get off the internet. And just spend time with those around you. Talk to your loved ones. Don't partake in this negativity. Just stay away from the Bird app. Let's be on it.
And I think that's where we should end today. Stay away from Bird app. Yeah, that's a really, really good, wise piece of advice. But just to echo, Jay, thank you so much for jumping on and talking your truth, talking to your experiences, and being, in my opinion, extremely open. I know it's not easy. I know we did try to dig a little bit into some of the pain and frustration you experienced there. But on behalf of myself and Daniel, thank you so much for your time and your presence.
Thank you. There's a reason I decided to come do this. I knew that I felt comfortable talking to you both. I wanted to hear from you, Daniel, about your side, and Steve, I love you, so.
And we just love Steve.
Yeah.
I love me too.
Steve.
But for our audience there, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are looking for a write-up, Daniel Kwan will be posting in the show notes his write-up. If you want to see some other creators and their write-ups and their thoughts on it. You can, of course, follow Jay's Twitter at NalaWoo. They will not be on Twitter for the next little bit. I've made them promise
don't
that.
expect new things. Don't expect new things on Twitter.
But you can see that, as well as a lot of other creators that we have mentioned here. So check out their socials and everything like that. Get a lay of the land. And I think the challenge here is, if you were invited to a creator summit, how would you react to it? How would you try to navigate it? And what would you want out of it? I think that's worthwhile to just mull on. Anyways, that's it for us. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Damn, Steve.